Hold on, everybody, C4. Welcome back to the channel. I think in the spirit of Combine Week, it's a perfect time to start my positional rankings for the 2022 NFL Draft. If you are a subscriber on my Patreon, you would have already seen these quarterback rankings. My Patreon will always get my prospect rankings first. They'll be a lot more in-depth. They'll feature my brand new, I finally figured it out and released a grading chart to kind of throw a rating on all these players, and you get a lot more in-depth information. But always like to have some sort of content drip here onto the YouTube. But if you do support my Patreon, which, that's the last thing I'm going to mention up. It's not a shield for my Patreon. It's just a way to go above and beyond to support the channel. I always try to add value where I can, especially around draft season, and I'll give a little bit more in-depth breakdowns of these prospects. We got 10 quarterbacks here that we want to talk about today, and let's get into it, man. It is not a strong quarterback class. We've been doing these prospect breakdowns. I think my first quarterback list was like comparing who's going to be better, Jameis Winston out of Florida State or Marcus Mariota out of Oregon. And now here we are, all the way in 2022. It is not a strong draft class. I think if you're one of the teams, you look at Pittsburgh, you look at Washington, you look at probably, I don't really want to say Tampa. I think Tampa will rock and roll with Kyle Trask. But, Pittsburgh and Washington are prime examples of teams that probably need day one starters. Not the best year for that by any means. Maybe the number one guy could be a day one starter. But other than that, a lot of these quarterbacks, you're going to kind of want to take the Jordan Love, Trey Lance approach to a certain, you could maybe feature them a little bit as rookies, but you're going to more so play the long-term game with these quarterbacks. And that is what I think is going to be best suited for this year's draft class. Well, let's get into it with quarterback number 10 on my rankings. And we're going to start with Dustin Crum out of Kent State. I remember Dustin Crum came on my radar. If you follow me on Twitter, I've talked about him for the last couple years. Because in 2019, he made a bowl game against Jordan Love and Utah State. And I was watching that game just to see firsthand. Jordan Love, let's go. See what he can do. And Dustin Crum outdueled him in that matchup. 300 yards, 150 on the ground, 2 touchdowns. I mean, I was like, this guy, what? Has anyone heard of this Dustin Crum guy? What is going on? His stats that year were great. I was kind of hoping for him to take a bigger leap in 2021. Didn't really do so. Against MAC level competition. I mean, I don't know. Probably lost some talent there at Kent State for sure. But, not the best of year at the Combine last night, oddly enough. He looked solid, had a good deep ball, which I think is a pro for him. But ultimately, I have draft grade priority UDFA. Could sneak into the 7th round, but I think ultimately he's going to be a guy that, backup, exciting backup, can step in, offers that scrambling ability. I think in today's NFL, you almost want your emergency backup quarterback to be that guy that can kind of scramble, make plays, break and play, because these aren't going to be guys, most backup quarterbacks aren't going to be able to come in and operate your offense to a T the way your starter does. So when that's the case, you kind of want that guy that can just make plays when things break down, because things are going to break down an awful lot when you lose your starter in a pinch, especially in game, and a guy like Dustin Crum is going to offer some value there. That's why my pro comparison is a man that's just the ultimate backup quarterback, it feels like, in today's NFL. He played for 50 different teams, and that is my pro comp of Josh Johnson. Moving on to quarterback number 9. Guy that actually looked really good at the Combine, throwing the ball. I thought, in terms of just pure throwing, who impressed the most, I'd give him the edge, and that is Cole Kelly out of southeastern Louisiana. Gigantic man, 6'7", 260 pounds. Originally was a 4-star recruit at Arkansas. Got arrested after a DWI, and unfortunately had to transfer away. And there's a lot of reports I see on Reddit too, people talking about it, people on campus saying this guy's an absolute dickhead, which I don't know, for what it's worth. But eventually transferred to southeastern Louisiana and honestly looked like 2017 Carson Wentz. Every time I flipped it on, man. He has great size, good deep ball, can scramble. I think it's from an athletic standpoint, 6'7", 260. He's not going to be an S-tier athlete, but he's the kind of guy, he's a people mover. That is a gigantic human being, and he's definitely going to be an asset in the red zone. 60 touchdowns last year for southeastern Louisiana. Absolutely carrying the load there. So I think he's an interesting quarterback. To quote my Patreon, I said, if you said C4, you had to put a popping hot, Little Caesars hot and ready on a true sleeper quarterback in 5 years who could be something. I would probably throw my money on Cole Kelly this year just because the intangibles, the size. I don't know how much validity you can put to the off the field. It just, you got to say, anytime you get arrested and have to transfer away from a school, it's not great. Level of competition is always going to be an issue for him, but I think ultimately a very interesting quarterback prospect. I currently have 7th round UDFA, somewhere in that territory. Pro comparison, Ryan Mallett, kind of as a thrower. I mean, Ryan Mallett didn't offer the scrambling ability that Cole Kelly did, but again, the scrambling ability is just, it's like Carson Wentz. You're going to call Carson Wentz a scrambling quarterback. He can make plays with his legs, but he's not really a dual threat. Also see some elements of Joe Flacco to his game, but I think Cole Kelly, interesting late round quarterback / priority UDFA for this year's draft class. Quarterback number 8, we're going Caleb Ellaby from Western Michigan. Now, he's kind of like the jack of all trades, master of none type quarterback. I think that's the easiest way to say it. Doesn't have elite arm talent, but he has enough to make it in the NFL. Isn't an elite athlete, but has enough to make plays when, plays break down, make it with his legs, get the first down with his legs. I think just, solid. He just looks like a solid NFL backup quarterback. Currently have a prospect grade of the 6th round. He could go UDFA in that rate, but I think a team could fall in love with him as a backup kind of guy that can just come right in a pinch, operate your offense. It's not going to be too crazy, but he's also not going to be the guy that, turns the ball over. You're not going to feel completely nervous throwing him out there. And I have the pro comparison of Kyle Allen, who's a guy that can start in a pinch and has shown that throughout his career. I mean, there's some value. Ron Rivera loves him, but ultimately is best suited as a decent to solid NFL backup quarterback. Quarterback number 7 on my list is Bailey Zappi from Western Kentucky / Houston Baptist. I mean, lit up the scoreboard last year, almost 6,000 passing yards, 62 touchdowns. Insane. Yes, it's the scheme to a certain degree, but I think in today's NFL, these air raid quarterbacks can transition fairly well to the NFL. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be like, well, this is, and my pro comparison is Case Keenum, and Case Keenum is a very valuable backup. I mean, there was a point in time the Minnesota Vikings thought they could start and win games with Case Keenum. I think there's going to be teams that think you do that with Bailey Zappi. Has enough zip on the ball, very smart quarterback, quick processor. I think, to a certain degree, he's not going to be Josh Allen, some of those top-end quarterbacks with elite arm talent. That's what's kind of limit his ceiling just a little bit. But I think, honestly, out of all the quarterbacks in this year's draft class, you've got to think of one like a good backup. And trust me, I'm speaking of this as a Philadelphia Eagle fan. Good backup quarterbacks are very valuable. Bailey Zappi is like the premier top backup quarterback, guy that's going to get multiple, Case Keenum is now relegated to a backup, but a guy that's going to be, Chase Daniel in terms of contracts. I think Bailey Zappi is going to be a guy that will have a couple starts under his belt, but ultimately bounce from team to team to team to team as a very valuable backup quarterback, will make some nice change as a backup quarterback. And he's going to be one of those guys that I imagine, 10 years from now, it's going to be, Bailey Zappi's going to be the next hot offensive coordinator or something like that. But yeah, 5th, 6th round, absolutely for Zappi, especially if he goes in the right scheme that just asks him to kind of do the same similar type of throws that he had to execute at Western Kentucky. B6 is a polarizing quarterback in this year's draft class, and I have Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati. Had a pretty decent combine. I'll be honest, he's a guy that I don't want to dog because I like Cincinnati. I was wholly behind the Bearcats making the playoffs. Watched a lot of Desmond Ridder over the last couple seasons. I don't know, man. He's just one of those guys. I don't see it. I'm not going to say that he's going to have to move the tight end or anything crazy like that. Ran a 4.50 at the combine, showed off great athleticism. We knew he was a good dual threat quarterback. Just as a thrower, it's just so inconsistent. I don't know. I think the best spot for Desmond Ridder is going to a similar role like Tyler Huntley, where Tyler Huntley went to the Ravens, was just, long shot. I mean, he was solid at Utah, but ultimately, got a tremendous opportunity in a scheme that absolutely suits his skill set. And Tyler Huntley looked absolutely serviceable when he had to fill in for Lamar Jackson. I feel like that is where you want to see Desmond Ridder go. If he's got to go to some team that they're going to try to reinvent him and try to just build off his athleticism, I don't think that's going to be the best landing spot. But if he goes to a team that, requires some mobility at the quarterback spot, I think that's going to be a really nice spot. But he's so polarizing. Some teams, you look at Bleacher Report, I think quarterback 1. I think that's a little ridiculous. And I don't want to dog him again because I think sometimes there's quarterbacks I think are overrated. And I'm like, I don't see anything special. This guy sucks. Someone like Ridder, he has the intangibles, won a lot of games, has the scrambling ability that will carry over to the NFL. It's just, as a thrower, it's just far too inconsistent, which really reminds me of Kellen Mond to a certain degree, because that was kind of Kellen Mond coming to A&M, has all the tools, ticks A, B, and C boxes for being an NFL quarterback. Just the consistency is wildly all over the place, and it's going to take him a bit if he ever can reach to that plateau of being a starting NFL quarterback. So for Ridder, especially in a scheme that requires a mobile quarterback, I have a 3rd, 4th round grade on him. QB5, I have Matt Corral out of Ole Miss. He was a guy that I want to hate more because he originally committed to Florida, and then we had some coach shuffling around. He bounced, went to Ole Miss. And I thought he was going to be the next great Florida Gator quarterback, but if we got Matt Corral, we wouldn't have had Kyle Trask, and that Kyle Trask season was amazing. So for Matt Corral out of Ole Miss, the release is something that you will constantly see talked about. His release is as smooth and as quick and as NFL ready as there is in this year's draft class. Again, kind of like Ridder to a certain degree, it's just the consistency. The accuracy is inconsistent operating. I don't think coming out of Ole Miss for a pro, like if you're trying to say, and I see a lot of comparisons to Patrick Mahomes, where there's just so much volume, there's just so much mistakes up and downs, that's valuable. that's a valuable learning process for him to go through in college, which, yeah, sure, that's valuable, I guess. But I think there's immediately a negative that can be attached to that of this guy's going to have to learn to operate a structure. Not a lot of structure at Ole Miss, unfortunately. And I feel like there's going to be certain teams in the NFL that are going to be scared about that. Also, slightly slight. I mean, he was listed at 205, came to the combine, I think 10 pounds heavier, he's almost 215, which helps. But you can still just look at it as staying healthy and his scrambling ability, which he really took to another level this year at Ole Miss. And is that going to be sustainable at an NFL level? And I think there's very much legitimate concerns to the durability, to his play style, being able to operate within structure so he doesn't open himself out to bailing out of a pocket and taking unnecessary hits on what is still, even though he's a little bit heavier than expected, a slight frame. I like Matt Corral. I think he is a decent quarterback prospect. I currently have a 2nd to 3rd round grade on him. Pro comp is tough. I have Taylor Heineke. I think he's a better version of Taylor Heineke, which speaks to Matt Corral and how I view him as a prospect. Because you look at Taylor Heineke, he had like some intrigue to being maybe a guy that could be more than just the guy that fills in for Ryan Fitzpatrick. But ultimately for Heineke, there's limitations to the arm talent and the scrambling ability where it's just like, you know, Washington's in the market for a new quarterback. But there was glimpses of Heineke, especially from like a gamer standpoint. And I don't mean that like he plays Xbox. Like in any given day, Heineke can give you a drive that can compete. We saw him go toe-to-toe with Tom Brady, for God's sakes. I think Matt Corral is just a better version of Taylor Heineke. He's Taylor Heineke from a technical standpoint with a better arm and a little bit more mobility. But in terms of just play style, I got a lot of Heineke vibes for the better, which is a positive comp. I think Matt Corral can go to a spot. You know, I'm seeing something like, you know, New Orleans, have him sit behind Jameis Winston or something like that for a year. But I do think ultimately you get more Matt Corral. You don't start him right away, but there could be something there for him to eventually turn into a starting NFL quarterback. Before we're going, Sam Howell out of North Carolina, 6 feet 225. He's a guy that came in on a lot of people's boards as QB1 entering this season, but it was always going to be tough losing the amount of talent that North Carolina lost. They lost S-tier run game, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. They lost top ACC receivers, De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome. Just the talent was not there around him in North Carolina, and he had to really shoulder a whole lot. I remember that 2021 season opener against Virginia Tech. That was horrific. That was like as bad of a game if I've seen a top-tier quarterback have. I was like, this guy sucks. Obviously, things kind of smoothed out a little bit. Was not a great year in 2021, but there's something there in Sam Howell. I currently have a 2nd round grade on him. The pro comp is kind of consensus across the board that he's current Baker Mayfield. He's not the Baker Mayfield that was, you know, almost offensive rookie of the year his first year with Cleveland. He's a Baker Mayfield right now that definitely has some questions about his game. I feel like that's valid with Sam Howell, but the fact that he has some dual threat ability, unlike Matt Corral, a little bit bigger. I think both Matt Corral and Sam Howell showed off dual threat ability this year that was kind of surprising to a certain degree. I think Howell has the arm talent, has definitely the arm talent. I think he's a great deep ball, one of the best deep balls. They were talking about that all during the combine. Throws it nice, a lot of velocity, can get there, has some zip on his passes, but a guy that I think, like, you know, maybe he could start day one, but ultimately, you know, you'd rather wait and see. Let that one marinate a little bit. But Sam Howell, 2nd round, all day long. And at quarterback number 3, we have Carson Strong from Nevada, 6'3", 215 pounds. Watched a lot of his tape last year, live, here on the East Coast in Canada. Like when you're going to bed, every other game's off. There's always some, you know, Mountain West games that are on. I watched 5 or 6 Nevada games, just out of the blue. Not a Nevada fan by any means. And Carson Strong was very good, very entertaining. I think the only thing, you know, he could be considered a lottery pick of this draft, because the only thing that's really keeping him, you know, I think solidly out of the QB1 conversation is the medical. I mean, I don't have the access to what NFL team doctors will dig up, but it sounds like a significant injury that he suffered in high school, and one of those ones that, like, some people are murmuring could have longevity issues. I mean, I don't want to be the guy that, like, harps this or sounds some breaking news. I could be slightly ignorant to the severity. This is something that people that just talk about the draft aren't going to know, aren't going to have the same amount of information in the NFL. But if there are longevity issues, I mean, it could be kind of like Jay Ajayi coming out of Boise State, where teams draft him, know that he might not have the longest career, but there is a very, very decent player in there, especially if you're looking for a pocket passer. He can maneuver in the pocket pretty decent, has a cannon of an arm. I mean, it felt like it was him versus Malik Willis during the combine of just throwing the bombs that was getting everyone oohing and on. The arm talent is legitimate. I think I have a 2nd round grade on him. And my pro comparison for him is Sam Bradford. I think from a style standpoint, reminds you a lot of Sam Bradford, but the reason why that kind of separated Sam Bradford from the others is the injury concern. You can't think about Sam Bradford as, you know, a GOAT Oklahoma quarterback, GOAT college quarterback, put up ridiculous numbers. but he always had those injury concerns surrounded with his career. So, maybe it's unfair to ultimately come down to a pro comparison because of something that not a lot of people know, but there is the injury tag right now and concern with Carson Strong. So I kind of like slapping on that Bradford, because if Carson Strong can defy the odds, if the knee injury is not as severe, if he goes to the right team that could just tell him, hey, operate from a pocket, I think there could be some really, really nice value there. Have a second round grade on him. And I think that some team's going to be very happy. I don't think he sneaks in the first round. I don't think, he showed enough last year. I mean, Jay Norvell's scheme was fairly favorable in the Mountain West. It wasn't like he was running the most difficult scheme, but he's still a really good prospect. And I think he'll make some team happy in the second round. Quarterback 2, we're going Malik Willis from Liberty. 6 feet tall, 215 pounds. Showed off his arm, showed out during the combine. Showed the arm off. I think the accuracy, a lot of people were gauding about Malik Willis all over social media. I actually thought he was like average. Accuracy struggled at times, but hey, when they got him to set up the deep ball, it looked pretty damn good. Malik Willis is a currently kind of, I don't want to say that this is a blanket statement, but generally the idea of Malik Willis is right now he's a freak athlete who plays quarterback. I would have loved to see him run the 40-yard dash, but fast quarterbacks just don't do that anymore, and I totally get it after the whole Lamar Jackson, hey, do you want to play some wide receiver? Like, that's just disrespectful. But Malik Willis absolutely needs more refinement, more so than any quarterback on this list. But if the right staff pulls the trigger on Malik Willis and can develop him and build off the athlete that he enters the league as, you might have a franchise quarterback. It's very, very almost consensus at this point. Malik Willis has the highest ceiling out of any of the quarterbacks in this year's draft class. But much like any of the quarterbacks, I don't have a first rounder. I think he's fringe. Like, if I'm listing my top 50 players, he's in the low 30s. Probably have him like 35, 36, somewhere in that range. But ultimately, I think he's second rounder in terms of talent because he's not pro ready. A lot of tools that you need to work. But then again, the last quarterback that wasn't really pro ready, you gotta wait and see, was like Trey Lance, and he went top 5. So I wouldn't be surprised if Malik Willis goes in the first round. He most likely will go in the first round. But in terms of what you're getting as a rookie player immediately in the building, I don't think he's gonna offer you a whole lot. But you could probably use him like Trey Lance did for the 49ers to a certain degree, is spot duty. Give him some design plays, let him go make some athletic plays with his legs, see what he has a little bit. Maybe you play him near the end of the season, depending on what team he lands with. But the most important thing with Malik Willis is patience. And my pro comparison is Colin Kaepernick. Now, this is prime Colin Kaepernick. I made this, and I made this comment on social media, on Twitter, and I got kind of dogged for it a little bit, but he's like peak Colin Kaepernick. You gotta remember, peak Colin Kaepernick was unstoppable. That's the Green Bay Packers. He ran for like 300 freaking yards against them. But Malik Willis, great arm, cannon of an arm, freak athlete that needs to learn the technical side and refine it just a little bit of the quarterback position. Pete Colin Kaepernick, huge arm, S-tier athlete, inconsistent in terms of technique, in terms of accuracy, in terms of reading the game. And that's kind of where I see Malik Willis to a certain degree, but a very, very high ceiling. And if you told me right now, as a fan, I'll say right now, the Philadelphia Eagles. You said the C4, the Eagles, question marks around Jalen Hurts. If there had to be one quarterback that I would like to see the Philadelphia Eagles get, and I would shit all over any pick that the Eagles made of a quarterback with their 3 first rounders, I would say Malik Willis would be the lesser of two evils because of that ceiling. But the number one quarterback that I have in this draft class is Mr. Small Hands himself, Kenny Pickett out of Pittsburgh, 6'3", 220 pounds. He's just the most pro-ready guy. And in a league right now that is lacking in NFL talent at the quarterback spot, there's like, 10, 12 good quarterbacks in the NFL. There's going to be some teams that are looking for a day one starter in this year's draft, and I think the only guy in this class that you're probably going to feel somewhat comfortable starting day one is Kenny Pickett, a guy that throws with tremendous anticipation. Dane Brugler from The Athletic described his mobility as elite functional mobility within the pocket, which is a perfect description. Sometimes he bails out of a clean pocket, but that is almost consensus across the board, an issue with any quarterback that offers some form of mobility, and it's something that quickly got to get rectified to the next level. But I think Kenny Two Gloves, with the small hands, there's going to be some teams that ride him off the board, especially if you're a cold weather team. But I don't know. I don't think it's that big of an issue, even though they're historically small, same level as Michael Vick. He is still a very nice quarterback. And my pro comp here is Ryan Tannehill, and that's not the best. I'm not saying he's going to be a fringe, but Ryan Tannehill's a guy that can play like a fringe top 10, if not legitimate top 10 quarterback, can make plays with his legs, can throw on time, as long as the talent is surrounding him. That's kind of how I finished my grade with Kenny Pickett. I think if he lands a team like Joe Burrow, that have a lot of talent around him, he's going to be able to operate that scheme and get the ball to the players that need to make plays. If he has to be a guy kind of like Trevor Lawrence, where he goes to Jacksonville, it has to be the guy that elevates the team around him. I don't think you're going to really be happy with the end result of that pick. But a great situational player, if he can land in a spot like Mac Jones for a degree, where he goes to like perfect scheme, perfect talent around him, I think you got yourself a day one starter in Kenny Pickett. But ultimately, yeah, not the strongest of draft classes, but still some really fun people. And, you already know Malik Willis, Madden 23, is going to be super overpowered, super fun to use. So that will do it for me today, guys. Those are my top 10 quarterbacks for the 2022 NFL Draft. Let me know what you guys think about my rankings in the comment section below. Is there anything that you think's different? Do you like my pro comps? Do you hate my pro comps? Do you give a better pro comp? What do you think about them? Let me know, and I'll see you guys back in the next one. Thanks for watching. If it's your first time stopping by, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button, and peace out.